Welcome to I Have Something to Say, where unfiltered opinions meet raw authenticity. If you're tired of the same old canned answers and crave genuine conversations about real issues, then you've landed in the right spot. So buckle up for a roller coaster of diverse perspectives. Yours truly, Sami Jimen Marrero, and my co-host, Chris Majocha, will dive headfirst into topics that impact our daily lives. From the boardrooms to the streets, get ready to hear real people cut through the BS and deliver the discussions you've been waiting for. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of I Have Something to Say. And I'm very excited, and thank you for the introduction, Chris. You're awesome. To Mr. Malik Williams, the founder and CEO of Real Sync Music. And he's been in the grind for almost 3 decades as an entrepreneur. He's an Emmy-nominated composer, engineer, educator, and just a community champion and advocate. And so, welcome, Malik.
This is part 2 of Malik Williams' episode, picking up where we left off last week.
I want to mention, right, how you've been working for the past 3 years on the Secret Society of Black Creatives and giving back in a more structured way, right? And so how did that come about, right? It's like I feel like you've given back, like, and brought people up with you, right? And elevated them. But how, what was that switch that made you create something that would then be dedicated specifically, right, to support others that are walking your same journey? They're just maybe a little bit just behind, right? And so then how did that all come about?
Yeah, so that there, really is, like I said, from all this history and everything. And just to add, one of the things that I realized, like, a lot of my friends aren't here anymore, right? A lot of them, died doing different things or maybe locked up. So a part of this with opportunities, my principal and different people, was me staying alive. And I didn't realize that, right? But I realize it now that this was an opportunity for me to explore different things. People that cared about me, these teachers, educators that became friends, even when I did a lot of bad stuff, right? They called me out all the time, or they pulled me over instead of, even the principal, pull me aside. Like, I know you did that, but I'm not going to say, if they come to me, I got to tell them, but I know you did that, right? So, like, having that type of grace in a way. So that was kind of like leading up to, like, the Secret Society of Black Creatives was started because of the diversity mission, over COVID. We call it the era of George Floyd, right? Where everyone wants to, figure out how to do something. So, the state, the film office, they actually had a program that they were doing at RCC regarding film. And so I was involved with that. This is 2020 when this was that production was supposed to happen, like in March. I think it was 2020. Before that, myself, Vladimir Minuti, who is the president, I'm the vice president, but the 4 of us that are founders, Narissa Williams and Evelyn Brito. The 4 of us were on the diversity committees for the Mass Film Office, the Mass Production Coalition. And there's a lot of these talks, like for me, Grammy, our Grammy chapters in New York. So, me being very involved in that, the Audio Engineering Society, on the education committee, and this is mostly me, I'm the audio person generally, but education committee, diversity committees, being on these global Zooms, with these diversity talks or whatever it is. And actually, being engulfed in the diversity thing here in my town of Randolph. I'm one of the founders of the Diversity Coalition out here, right? And me saying, like, oh, I'm already in this kind of diversity thing. So cool, we'll jump on these Zooms with the state and we'll figure out how we're going to move the needle and make things happen. And every time we show up, and I literally would look at it kind of and be like, all of these people on this call could potentially hire me. But everyone's here saying that they want to do something, but nobody's even saying, hey, Malik, what's going on today? Well, let's have coffee, right? So let's start up with the people above the line, which is us, right? And so once we started planning, trying to decide what we wanted to do, really, we kind of left. Because it becomes exhausting after a little while. It's like, come on, you haven't thought of something that you can do that's going to help the community, right? I'm a community person. So if you're my neighbor and you look like whatever you look like, you're still my neighbor and you're my community. So I function off of community first, right? Diversity, and like I'm very unapologetically Black, even before you knew I was bald, right? I'm still the bald head Black guy, right? And so, but I feel like I've done this my whole life. I couldn't be in these rooms that you're talking about, that, you know, that I'm sharing with you, if I wasn't secure with who I was as a Black person. And so over the years, I've learned, especially when I didn't have any hair, there was almost like a joke between friends. It's like the production coalition or some cocktail party. I don't care why you remember me. You're just going to remember me. It could be intellectual. It could be because I am Black and just the color of my skin. It could be because I'm bald head. It could be whatever. Some people say you smile too much or whatever. I'm like, okay, that's cool.
You're a unicorn, for God's sake.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm a little bit, it could be that horn sticking out of my head, right? I just won't dress in all red. So like understanding like that sense of security, right? But also showing up and having conversations about things that we know that we should be doing, right? I didn't know Vlad at the time that well, and I actually knew Narissa the longest. You know, kind of, we had worked together, kind of like a sister. And then Evelyn, I met more. Recently, I had worked on a project with her. So that was something where we're like, okay, we're all talking or whatever, but the people on the screen at the time aren't really reaching out. They're not really, you know, programming any type of events or anything that they're doing like in the community. And part of what we knew we needed to do was like, sure, I have relationships with, you know, the director in the film office or anything like that. And these folks are definitely willing to like come into our spaces, I would say, but it wasn't the idea of we have to do this, you know, like we have to program events where kids can, or people in our community across the board can wake up and walk to, because of the lack of transportation, the lack of awareness, number one, is the biggest deal, right? So me being that little kid from the community with the 9 brothers and sisters and father getting sick and on welfare for a while and being frightened of all kinds of stuff, I'm still that kid. I worked since I was 10 years old. I didn't get school clothes and these things unless I was cutting grass or whatever, right? So literally, I'm still that kid. So if I know the mentality, and we don't lose that, however we grow up, whatever we experiences that we have, right? Especially anything that's a bit adverse, whatever, traumatizing, right? So you have like the trauma, which is more extreme, but when we have other experiences that sometimes we just take for granted, you know, especially when it comes to race and when it comes to feeling less than, or being spoken to or treated less than, right? So some people act out different ways. You know, they get really angry and go do something. I happen to try to use my words. I try to be articulate. I can tell you about yourself and tell you some really things that you don't like about yourself in a very eloquent way, right? But you're going to know exactly how I feel. And that's how I treat everyone, every CEO to every company that I've ever, you know, spoken to. The thing about it now, which I still repeat, is Black is still trending, right? And so from us, like being, again, this era of George Floyd, where everything's happening every day, protests and the political issues that are happening, that was a daily basis, right? And the anxiety that we felt already as a Black person, or a person of color in particular, right? And then understanding like, oh shoot, now it's even more difficult for me to even get into this agency, you know, or this production, you know, company, or this movie that's being shot, or union, right? So what we did is we sat with the unions, with IATSE, and said, you know, hey, like, we already understand. I understand the dynamic of a young person getting into a union, right? People of color can't get into plumbers union, electrical unions, like basic construction stuff, right? Getting into a film union, getting into something like that is, you know, that just seems unsurmountable, right? So what we did is we said, hey, if we, you know, we created this secret society that nobody really knew about, except our, you know, the commissioner knew, and the president of the Audio Engineering Society knew, who was my friend, you know, stuff like that. I'm like, hey man, we're going to kind of like bounce and go do our own thing. We'll be back. So we told them, because it was most of the public thing, like people even saying on Zoom calls when we wanted to plan an event, to say like, where's the money coming from? Like, you don't ask a white person where the money's coming from. Since when do you ask a white person where the money's coming from? When the Little League baseball team gets money from the sub shop, you don't ask them where the money came from. You just know that they show up with T-shirts, with logos, with the sub shop on it, right? So being so condescending to ask somebody like us, those kind of questions is really that systematic kind of root of it, right? Me talking to the city of Boston and somebody saying, are you sure you want to talk to the mayor? I can do it for you. No, I'll do it for me. You know why? Because that perception of a white person going in and with some idea, which is the white knight syndrome type of thing, knocks me right out the box, right? It's still going on now with different things that we're doing, right? And it's like, no, like I can do this, or we can do this. And I'm kind of the big mouth of the crew. So I'm the business development person, but it's me in the street. Because what goes along with that is you have the corporate relationships, political relationships, and you also have the street relationship. Then you have all the little gatekeepers in between, all the organizations that are in between, all the Black folks that put on their bow ties and go to the Martin Luther King breakfast, right? That aren't doing anything for the community. Those are the gatekeepers. A lot of these folks that are in those spaces, right? That I know from 30 years ago or 20 years ago, thinking that I'm going to like a Black men's mentorship thing as a young kid, and I'm golfing with some, with some older Black men, right, at Franklin Park. And I'm thinking, yes, I got a bunch of mentors. I'm going to be good. And the answer is no. They're not turning around. Maybe if I pester them enough, then I can, get a meeting. But at the end of the day, you want somebody like looking out and saying like, whoa, there's a lot of ambition here. Let's get this in action, right? Which is what leaders do, right? Leaders would actually identify those people within a community or employees or whatever it is. and you want to elevate those people, right? You want to offer them. Now, little Black and brown kids don't really have that opportunity in business and corporate environments and advertising agencies. Little white kids get their hand held because I've referred enough little white kids to see their career, and I've referred little Black kids and watch it go stagnant, like nothing happening, right? So me on the outside looking in, being very, I'm very intentional, very unapologetically, honest and open with my thoughts, right? I shoot from the hip at the end of the day, right? So it's like if I say, hey, you're doing that little white thing again, you're actually kind of overstepping and trying to tell me what's good for me, right? You had this kid right here that, wait, hold on a second, I'm on Instagram, and this is what I see with agencies in particular, right? Because it's so white in these environments, right? I've met a lot of really, really great people. I still feel like in the agency world, I still have a lot of friends, people I consider like my siblings, right? But when I look at it from a corporate standpoint, right? When I see that Red Sox game, or if I see somebody on that boat or that yacht for whatever company party, and I scan the photo, because this is exactly what people of color do. We scan everything and say, oh, do I even want to be there? Right? Or I say, hey, whatever happened to that young Black kid that I actually referred to you guys? They're not on there. Matter of fact, I'm going to call that kid and find out, oh, I didn't know about it, which is a reply that I've received, right? I'm like, oh, interesting. And what happens, and this is the disconnect, right, with the opportunities, is when I do talks in schools, mostly like college, but you have professional etiquette and then you have the social etiquette, right? So, Chris, we met in a professional environment, right? But I remember you kind of like giving me a little bit of soap for the hook, right? That's what happens when you're comfortable with who you are in a professional environment, right? I don't treat everyone that way, right? So, and you don't probably treat, if I had to guess, treat everyone that way. There's some type of connection that is made. So for me, I'll say thank you again, because that's awesome to meet someone and make that connection. And, you kind of coming over to me after the fact and talking to me about what you do, right? That's, to me, is what's really important. But a lot of young people don't have that opportunity to really discern, like, how do I behave in these environments? So the way that you actually kind of like the soft learning lesson is being in those social situations, right? Company picnic, at the ball game, something like that. If you're on a shoot somewhere, how about have those young folks, those PAs, come have lunch with the senior people and the people above the line, right? It happens within the more artsy aspect of things, of production, it doesn't happen on the corporate side, right?
Mm.
Every once in a while that, you might see that, but it's not common. I know that because I'm a professional, and even being older and at a mass production coalition meeting, I remember people just kind of shunning me away. Like, who is this guy? Like, I'm Hollywood. What are you talking about? Who is this guy? Like, I'm cool. Like, I've been cool for a long time. You're not recognizing this, but basically based off of my color and being different, right? Now, a lot of times it's not that somebody hates you. It's not anything like that. They just don't find that they need to make any friends. They don't need to reach out into their network because they're up here, right? If they're all the way up here and I'm down here, if they need me, especially if they need me in front of a camera, if they need me doing something Black per se, that's when all of a sudden they're my best friend. And it's so funny watching the dynamic of how this happens all the time. My LinkedIn, the same thing. People reach out to me without introducing themselves, like executives in corporate. And I'm like, I know why you're reaching out to me, right? But what happens is, and I've actually busted people, people using me or using my name or using Secret Society of Black Creatives to say that they have a relationship with us, because now it's all of a sudden like we're almost on the auction block to say like, I know them, I can get you to them. So because a lot of people are still, feeling embarrassed and uncomfortable and ashamed, the whole thing that happens with diversity, they don't want to come to me as a Black person. They'll go to the white person to go get the Black person. But the white person is actually being paid, and that's where the equity is at, right? And so if I'm not the consultant and if I'm not winning the bid, right? If we didn't create Secret Society of Black Creatives to kind of control what happens within our community, then it's all of us in the same thing. We just get plucked out. You've always seen people of color on screen someplace, but not behind the camera. So holding people accountable to actually hire diverse talent behind the camera is, again, where the career building happens, climbing that ladder, the relationships are there, and again, getting a PA to come in, regardless of who they are, but, of color in particular, to be able to say, hey, something, what do you want to do with your life? I know you're a PA, you're in electrical right now, but where do you want to go? Right. And having those conversations and actually giving them opportunities. And statistically, it's like, people of color, Black people in particular, we're hired based off of our resumes, right? White people are hired based off of their ambition, right? Oh, you look like an ambitious young man at 22 years old. When you're going to be out of school, or that kind of thing. Come to my office. And so that's what happens. It doesn't happen to us, right? And I'm in those environments. I'm in those rooms. I'm in those very white spaces. So I get that. And I respect the people that I've been able to meet, right? To understand. But they don't understand that I'm way more grimy than people know I am, right? So my thought process is I'm already playing chess and I'm already some moves ahead of you. And so it's unfortunate that we have to think that way. But I think if you ask most people of color, they're going to say, yeah, something, they're either in it because they just need what they need and that's it. I want to get paid and I'm out of there, right? I'll go tolerate this, right? And sometimes we say, nah, no, thank you. I say no, thank you all the time because I'm like, no, like, if this isn't going to be beneficial to my career, if it's not going to be a part of this process that we're doing, to kind of like, create awareness and educate folks in the community. Right. So again, for me as an entrepreneur, like, we're a startup, so we don't have funding for our organization yet. Right. And so, me dealing with the governor, and I was on Maura Healey's Arts and Culture Policy Advisory Committee. Right. So like understanding that I'm at that table and understanding I have a responsibility to be there, right? Like I have to be there. Or showing up to the State House a few weeks ago when somebody says, thanks for being here. And I'm like, yeah, I gotta be here. Like there's nobody else that really comes from where I come from that looks like me, right? That has a voice that I can not only speak up for me, but I can speak up for women. I can speak up for the LGBTQ community. I can speak up for everybody. If I have that platform, I'm going to be mindful of who my network is and who my community is. And I'm going to say, hey, while I'm here, can you make sure those, those women over there, can you make sure that you invite them over to our thing or our little hangout, that kind of thing. Because that's what happens a lot of times, even with what we're doing, Evelyn in particular, Evelyn and Narissa, as women on our board, people know that they're on the board, but they might get shunned, right? Or somebody walks right by them without saying hello. In an environment where we're supposed to be talking about solving these issues, right? So it's like it's like we're totally outnumbered, but it's almost like a culture, and sometimes people are doing that because I've heard of some people doing that I know. I'm like, that person's a good person. I think maybe either they just had something else on their mind or just maybe uncomfortable. A lot of times when people get uncomfortable, they just get quiet because they don't know how. And that's what happens as well. Like people don't really know, like, can you just come over and say hi to me? I'm just a regular guy, right? Can you just be nice? We're walking down the aisle in the supermarket. Can you just say hi? Whatever. Like you need me to reach that box? Fine. Like totally cool. Like you can ask me to do it. But it's weird because you can look at somebody's face and for me, it's just a sense of who somebody is. Right. To figure out not just a connection because everyone's free to be who they are, more or less. I'm very introverted when I come home. I'm kind of a big mouth and I show up everywhere, and mostly because I have to with this mission that I'm on, right? But I don't really, again, my trauma-free zone is like my mental health and my bandwidth and my energy is very important. So I like pace myself in different things, but there's places that I have to go. I was at the State House, and this is like the misconception of Black people and our why. Like, why don't we show up to certain places? And someone said to me it was about the State House, like because a lot of the Black community doesn't really come when there's like an open celebration or anything happening at the State House, and they referred to it as like the trauma because the slaves built the place or whatever. And I'm like, and they didn't come out and say that, but they were insinuating like what this building represents. And I'm like, no. When I got the invitation, I saw continental breakfast on there, and that was the reason why I came. Like I came because there was going to be food. That's my reason. I think of two things: parking, because I live south of Boston, right? And it's at 10 o'clock. And this is as simple as the situation gets. It's not. You don't have to start thinking like way out there, like, oh, they didn't want to participate because of this Black issue. No, it's either they didn't know about it, you weren't very clear, right? Send them a text, poke them. Be very intentional and say, hey, did you get that message or whatever? It'd be cool if you can come down and do something, because we're people of color in particular, and especially Black people in Boston, we're going to just write it off anyways. If there's not a real reason for us to do something, because there's no proof of anyone, there's no evidence, as James Baldwin would say, right? Like there's no evidence. Show me the evidence of this, country treating us a certain way. So Boston, as racist as it is, which is a very racist town to this day, right? There's no evidence of somebody saying, we need you here because. Now, me, I'm different because I show up in spaces, right? But that's the reason why. And most Black people, as I told Mara, when I first met the Governor Healy, right? Like when we first talked is because she didn't resonate with me. And I told her that. I didn't get her. Like I needed to give her another chance to give me a first impression, right? Because I was on screen with her and a bunch of other candidates at the time. I was a delegate, which isn't something that I normally would get into. So it was all kind of new. So I became a public figure. Everyone's reaching out. And when I wanted to speak to her, I got the runaround. They don't realize how Hollywood I am. And I'm like, no, like they go to the website. I'm like, you realize who you're talking to right now? No, you tell the governor I'm sorry, you tell her to call. She was Mara, the AG at the time. And I didn't get a phone call. And so I ended up, through another friend in the city of Boston that knew her. And I still felt like I respected her work as AG. And the thing about it is like, how do I have that conversation based off of my impression and experience? And the conversation I had with her that day, probably like 45 minutes, we stayed on the phone, was me saying, hey, you know something? Because I respect you and because I respect what you've done, and because I know, like, I felt like she was the better candidate, honestly, from my own research, that perception of her coming in as governor and, me as a conservative type of person, in the community, if I perceived her the way I did in a negative manner, you're never going to get to those Black people that hate white people, that don't believe in politics and all that stuff. So I have to be the person to just tell you the very uncomfortable thing about my experience, because I do want you to succeed. I do want to help you. You know, I do want to be someone that's going to champion whatever movement that we have, but I have to be brutally honest because sometimes people don't really understand how their perception is, how they come off. So it's like almost like I'm your advisor, you know, don't do that thing anymore, right? Like you're doing that white thing. Don't do that white thing.
And I love that you do that. Can I tell you why? It's like I'm hearing you speak, and this is kind of like the blueprint, right? For showing up in your full power. Because a lot of people say that all the time. It's like, oh, you have to just show up. But what does that look like? And you kind of like just described what that looks like, right? It's just showing up, being truthful, honest, brutally honest at times. And it could be an uncomfortable, but someone has to do it.
Right.
And so if you're not, if you're in a position like you are to do just that, to step in, open your mouth, and just call a spade and say, listen, you may not see what's going on from your vantage point, right? Because you're so disconnected and far removed, or maybe you just, you know, haven't been exposed to, and that's okay too. Well, let me help you out here, right? And so I think it's just a wonderful thing that how you just describe what that looks like in real time, because many times, you know, you just don't know how to do that. I know that that's how Chris and I met, right? Because I do the same thing. I show up and I listen and observe, and then I'm like, you're full of it. You're got something going on. How can we fix this, right? And who's missing in this conversation, right? And people are like, oh my God, what just happened? But you just gave us a scenario, right? Like the whole thing, right? The whole experience. And I thank you for that, because it's hard sometimes to figure out what does that look like. And you just told us, right? A 45-minute conversation over the phone.
Well, the other thing too is you have to realize what, you know, timing is everything, right? If I was just some kid on the street, then may or may not go off so well. When I'm dealing with somebody reaching out and calling me, and this is just what happens. So what happens in government a lot of times, even still now in the state house, within this administrations, there's all these little gatekeepers, right? So even though now to this day, if I see, you know, the governor or lieutenant governor, we're going to greet with a hug, right? And I really appreciate that. I've been able to kind of really share my perspective from where I come from in the arts. This is mostly arts and culture that I'm in, but I'm into community as well. So I'm kind of across the board. This is where the unicorn stuff comes in, I think. And I have relationships that people don't typically would have. Like, so having a relationship in the corporate world, in government, and in the streets, right? So I am very comfortable with all my drug dealer friends that are out there doing crazy stuff. Like, you know, because from a human standpoint, it's not my job to judge anybody, right? I don't know. I also know circumstances of why people do what they need to do, right? Because they have people to take care of, young people to take care of. I've had police officers, the commissioner in the police in Boston told me a story about, you know, why or why not to lock somebody up, right? Because of our movie is called This Ain't Normal. I don't know if I shared that with you, Chris, but I'll send you guys a link. But it's about
I was reading up on it. Yes.
So the goal is to humanize who people are in our community, right? So once you humanize those people, this is where you get invited to the Red Sox game at the advertising agency, right? But they're not really looked at as a part of who everybody else is, the culture of whatever that corporate scenario is, right? Because those people aren't really used to it. You know, they're not used to having this different person in their life as a human being, right? Like white people don't get cornrows and Bo Derek braids until they go to Jamaica. Like they won't just go down into the hood and go get braids, right? Like think about it, right? Everyone comes back from Jamaica with braids. Like you don't even talk to black people. You got braids because you want this exotic experience. Why don't you just go down to, you know, be a patron to the salon and go get those braids and go make some friends in that community? I use the word hood just because of the neighborhood aspect of it, because that has a negative connotation sometimes. But go into the community and say, I saw these braids, or I was in, you know, Jamaica and got these braids. I never even knew I could do that. I didn't know my hair would stay. You know, can you guys do this?
Mm-hmm.
And people in our community would love that, right?
Yeah.
And so once you get down into the street level, you get a lot more diversity. Once you get
Yeah.
into the arts, you get a lot more diversity. It's all the old white folks, the stuffy white folks, right? Now, on the same side, you can get all those stuffy black people that have like, you know something, I'm tired of dealing with white people and I'm never going to tell you how I feel, which is what I told
Yeah.
the governor, right? I said, I tell you these things because black people don't have time. We're exhausted. We're not going to tell you exactly how we feel about anything. We've written you off, right? So you're
Yeah.
not going to get the vote. You're not going to get the cooperation. You're not going to get the support. That's so not just self-defeating, but it's detrimental to our community at the end
Yes.
of the day, right?
Yeah.
So if I can come in and say, hey, you know something? I'm a black person. This is how I think, right?
Mhm.
This is how I feel about you right now, right? But you can also do that with love, you know?
Mhm.
Like, again, you can do that being articulate. You can do that being very respectful. You won't hear me using certain language. Maybe if I'm talking to Chris, you know, after this.
I do.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
already know me.
After this recording's over.
But I use it for emphasis. It's good.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. But everybody does it. And the thing about it is, there are like N words. That's not how my parents
No.
taught me.
Mhm.
I try to share that now, you know, even with music, right? Like
Mhm.
even if I presented music that had certain language, because of that wall, right? They're gonna be, oh my God, what is this? But I've had, you know, producers send me songs that a client likes that I listen to, and I'm like, oh, what makes them think that I want to listen to this stuff? You couldn't find a radio version of this joint before you sent it to me? But
Mhm.
it's not necessary because they don't have to worry about how I feel about that. They don't have to worry about disrespecting me. And they also think it's accepted. That's the other part. They're
Mhm.
looking at me and saying, well, you know, this is a black thing. You guys just go ahead and do it. Right.
Mhm.
Like, no, like that's totally disrespectful. Like, I don't want my kids, you know, around that nonsense. Absolutely
Yeah.
not. Like, it's bad enough I have to edit a movie or something, that derogatory stuff on the screen.
Yeah.
Right. I have to put my headphones on, you know, because my studio's in my house. Right. And I share, right, a lot of things that's going on. We can't control everything. We have to be just mindful of our environment. We have to be mindful. Sometimes you have to use certain language to articulate the point that you're trying to make, right?
Mhm.
If it has some type of context to it, some type of historical context, or honestly, if I just want to tell you the real deal of a story of what happened, right? And that's, I think, from an arts perspective in particular, right? And from a communication, I want you to understand, like, this is the real deal, right? So everything takes context. Nowadays with young people, there is no filter at all. So people don't understand that. We listened to Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy and all these other comedians when I was a kid,
Mhm.
when I wasn't supposed to, right? And so my parents didn't want me, you know, it's funny. I'm sure my father was doing it with his friends or whatever. But my parents were pretty strict, and they taught us to be very respectful, you know, to, you know, these 10 kids in the house at the time. But, you know, again, like I try to share that. It's like, what's the happy medium of being the Dorchester kid from the community that's still, you know, I'm still that same kid. I did everything I wasn't supposed to do. I did all kinds of crazy stuff. Like I said, a lot of my friends aren't here anymore because of crazy stuff that we did, right? And so, like, being honest with that, right? Understanding that, you know, there's certain levels of crimes that people do, right? From stealing something off of someone's porch to stealing something from a store, from, you know, stealing a car, or, you know what I mean? Like these different levels of crimes, different levels of penalties. Once people have something to live for, right? It changes your perspective on anything, right? Sometimes that's a baby. Somebody has a baby and says, oh my God, I can't do this anymore with my life.
Right.
So I feel like I've just been lucky. I've been super duper lucky to like go right and not left in some cases, right? Go to Boston Tech and not Dorchester High, you know, to give me the experiences that I have, you know, and so I try to share that as much as possible, but also I try to understand, you know, again, not just my boundaries, but almost like my thought process of what I need to be doing to advance myself, right? Not to be stagnant, but all this matters. And I can't put money as on the scale with that, right? It's like, and that's what happens with a lot of people, you know, money will, you know, degrade your integrity. And so that's the thing there where I feel like us being cool, because we're all cool. We've established that early in this call. That coolness is the part of us coming together and saying, hey, you know something, how do we make this happen?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or me saying, how do you guys feel today? You all right? You good? Because I'm looking at you or whatever. And because I know you enough, you might not even disclose that to me. So I have to let you know my perception of something. I could be completely off base, but if I think it, I'm going to ask you out of concern, right? As a friend, and I hope we can be friends at this point. But it's not something as a man also that men don't do. Black men don't do that in particular. You'll hear this all the time, but men typically don't do that. So I try to also like share, be vulnerable. Things are happening in everyone's lives everywhere, you know. I didn't mention so there's 7 of us. I'm sorry, eight kids now altogether. Because in 2012 I lost my little brother to suicide, and 30 days later, my brother that got me into this music, the one that I revere, he passed away from a seizure or a mental health issue, right? So dealing with those kind of things, understanding like who we are, right? And I don't say that lightly when I say this. I just say like this is a big part of who I am, and being grateful for life, number one, but also being grateful for being able to navigate these you know, traumatic situations, and using your mind, you know, to like really figure out, like you read any business book, it always talks about your mind, you know, think in this direction, do this thing, right? When death, I already told you a lot of my friends, you know, died, you know, when they were younger. And I think of people now, I'm like, oh, this person died, like, because I thought I saw him somewhere, and I'm like, oh no, they died. So like that's already bad enough, and we kind of talk about it lightly in the community because you become so numb over these things. So my little brother kind of looked like me. If we had one more screen, like, you know, he was a little bit more, you know, a little more stocky or whatever. And to people would be like, oh, he's mean, and like, but we're clowns, right? So he was the person when I got into golfing, I did these things with him. He was all the way like hip hop, right? And so making fun of me for walking around with golf clubs and stuff like that, me taking him to the range one day, he was very athletic as well. All of a sudden, this dude showing up looking like Tiger Woods, like all the matching Nike gear and everything. He just became like an amazing golfer, right? But like, again, coming up and having these traumatizing experiences, he dealt with things since he was probably a teenager. I was that sibling that went from hospital to hospital and drove my mother everywhere with him, and, you know, tried to hang himself, and he tried to electrocute himself, and, you know, different institutions and electric shock treatment. And I'm sitting there listening to these doctors and basically saying, I wonder how screwed up I am. I don't even understand what this kid is coming from with this stuff. You know, I grew up in the same house with the same parents. You know, he was younger, like, you know, much younger than me. So coming up in a little bit of a different era, but also me kind of ejecting myself from these things. And like I said, I used to read, you know, I used to be in the self-help section, which I still do, you know, physically sometimes if you can turn the pages, but online on YouTube and different places. So like, I know what I did from, you know, I went through a divorce, like, you know, like 2010 or something like that. My brothers died in 2012. My father died in 2014. So these years of things. And so we have a choice of how we behave, right? Because of our minds, we have a choice about how emotionally we feel and how we project that, right? Some people feel a certain way and project that off onto other people, right? So I've always been mindful of when my brother was going through, you know, I want to say like maybe 10 or 15 years before that, you know, all these different doctors. And I remember just going to the bookstore and reading cases and a bunch of stuff that I went through. And I'm like, holy crap, like, whoa, like, this is pretty common. So this was my takeaway. I remember things that I never told anyone. I didn't tell my mother for 10 years that anything that I did, you know, back then, going to Mass General Hospital, seeing the behavioral health, not even knowing what behavioral health was, but I'm like, nah. And this is when I had my surgery on my arm. So I was in the hospital for a doctor's appointment, and I was like, let me go see how crazy I am. And I literally went and kind of checked myself in to have an appointment. And that was something that I was really curious at the same time. How do I actually help my brother? But also let me figure out, how do I gauge myself at the same time? This isn't things that I never told anyone way back. I'm very open with the conversations now, especially because of mental health conversations and suicide awareness. People do see me online. Nobody really knows if I'm having a good day or bad day, right? You might see me with my family and different things, which is all real, right? I'm super dad as much as I can be, right? I'm super conscious of that coming first. You know, my daughter, you know, grew up in California back and forth. People don't know that, but I was always a traditional, you know, traditional mom with her, like way back. To this day, she's at Cal State Fullerton, which is like amazing. We still do a lot of stuff, but I always stayed self-employed because I had to go back and forth with her. I, you know, made that relationship in the courts to say, you know, this is my daughter. She went to California because her grandmother had cancer, and basically I felt that was the best thing at the time. She was only 4, and so they ended up keeping her there, and I would have had to like sue to get her back and all this other crazy stuff. And I share this because like these are common things that people go through, and you know somebody that goes through a divorce. It was almost like the best thing that ever happened to me because I was able to learn who I was by going through such pain and such depression and everything else. And I remember taking my daughter to Disney over, and because I promised her when she turned 5, coming back on the plane and understanding what I was worried about was her, understanding my value and understanding what was healthy for me. And I was on the plane, and they say, put the mask over your face before the child. Any dad that cares about his kids, you can't even figure out what that's like. Like, what do you mean take care of myself before the child? Like, are you kidding me? But when I heard that, I was like, oh, shoot, like that's what they mean. If I'm not healthy, you know, if I'm not breathing, how does, you know, they can't. So I really live by that. And that's a big part of why I'm very mindful of my environment. And I know what I can deal with and what I can't deal with, right? But I spent a ton of time with me. So again, divorce, death, you know, it's me, you know, burying my brothers and everything else, the burden of the financial burdens, everything else, right? Out of all the kids, it's kind of like me. So I realized that that's a big part of who I am. This is the part of that coolness that I talk about, right? That coolness says, you know something, I'm super vulnerable. I don't know the answers. All I know is I don't have a dimmer, right? I'm neither on or I'm off, right? When I'm off, I'm taking care of me, right? When I'm off, I'm basically just trying to feel like, you know, even this conversation is a part of me like, hey, you know something, guys, this isn't happening by accident. So when I'm talking to other people, whether it be family related, you know, people that have different challenges, substance abuse, all these things, you have to think in that certain direction. You have to believe and have faith, right? Whatever that looks like to you is a big part of it. And that's why I realized that, well, I got to be doing if I'm on screen with you guys, which is really awesome, this is happening because it's supposed to happen. It's not happening just because of some accident. I'm not trying to get anything and you're not trying to get anything, right? This is literally happening because of this bigger picture that for me in my life, I look at the last 30 years, almost 40 years, and I say, that's why I met that person. Because that person's relevant today. But they were never not relevant, right? I've always checked up on people over the years. I'm the person that calls people randomly out of nowhere. Like, hey, just checking in, what's going on, right? I'm the person touring around in some random state. Like, hey, what's going on? I'm going to drive to Ohio today. I'm going to take a drive to Ohio and come see you guys. So I've realized that's a big part of who I want to be. That's it. You know, I want everybody else to be able to feel that, I think. So I try to share what that is. So you're not being pretentious, not having any alternative motives of anything. I do want to work. I want opportunity. I do want to show up to screen to meet Chris and these things, right? Stuff like that. Like that's a part of the process, but nothing's due to me. There's a lot that I can learn, you know. Chris, your personality and our interaction is different from a lot of producers that I've met, right? You might know that by now. That's why I appreciate meeting you, because it's not just about the business thing. It's not about anything, you know, I don't personalize anything at all, but I appreciate the text message, you know, to say, hey, dude, sent you this thing, right? Because we're running around as an entrepreneur. You never know what's happening on any given day.
Absolutely.
That kind of stuff. Because the corporate environment a lot of times that's that nurturing of relationships that way, which is just respect. You know, it's really just kind of being respectful if you can, you know, it's not commonplace at all. Right. So like for me, I do function based off of what's going on internally. A lot of times, you know, I do get my feelings hurt sometimes, you know, stuff like that. But that's also why I share like something as detrimental as death, as detrimental as, you know, me talking about my daughter. And again, if you scrub my social media, you won't see any of this stuff. You won't see a timeline of any of this stuff happening.
Right.
I'm just in a place now where, you know, one of my friends lost her sister, and I did a suicide awareness panel last year. They just did this event just recently last year at Encore Hotel, and I walk in, there's like 150 clinicians there, right? But my friend Toy from 6th grade, she lost her sister, and over the years I'm like, we got to figure out how to do something together. I'm thinking music, right? Like we got to do some cool stuff. I didn't know I'd be on a suicide awareness panel, right? Like, so for me, it's definitely was an experience that I had never done before, talking about any of this at all. If I know you personally, I would definitely share who I am and my why behind why I do. And that's just a part of my story. And I think a part of that is we can have these really earth-shattering, like detrimental things that happen to us, and we can still, you know, as we could probably, you know, poll a bunch of people and figure out, what did you go through, right? And why, you know, why and how did you get to where you are now, right? And we shouldn't give up. We should have faith. I don't know what I don't know, and I'm totally cool with that. You know, there's something called the art of allowing. I don't know if you've ever heard that. So the art of allowing is getting yourself in a space, call it meditation, call it, you know, prayer, whatever. But it's like spending less time talking to God and spending more time listening, right? For people. So, and you don't have to be of any particular faith per se, right? But it's just that idea of like, how do I keep myself out of my own way? How do I keep myself calm enough to allow this to happen, right? To allow me to meet you guys and get on here and, you know, and be comfortable enough to share, right? And so that's kind of like what I'm made of. I'm not really any more complicated than that, you know. Regardless, hit me up anytime, whatever you want. If I can help you, cool. If we can do something together, cool. If you need something that I have and you don't have money per se, totally cool. Just give me a shout, right? It's all about the integrity behind that, right? If you're making money, I want to make money. If you're not making money, let's talk about it, right? That's called like friendship, you know. maybe call it friendship or something. But no, like that's what makes me tick, and that's why like I appreciate like sharing all this stuff, because at the end of the day, one of the things that's been on top of mind for me is as an artist, right? So everything that I'm made of is really about me as an artist, and how does that project out into the world, right? And how do I feel about that? So being able to, you know, write songs or write music, or This Ain't Normal, the music in that film, you know, is like sometimes scoring the picture and the emotional aspect of it. Is it what I want to write though? Right. So it's like, is that who I am? And so trying to find that space there as an artist, you know, because it's easy to lose it, you know, when you're doing art for work. It's so easy to kind of lose that. So that's why, like, for myself, I try to be like a little bit more of an open book, just to kind of make sure that I'm being equal, like the integrity across the board of who I am, but also knowing that I still have work that I want to do with myself, my own self work, right? So, and part of it is just sharing.
This has been such a gift to have this conversation, because it's been just very grounded, insightful, and I think helpful in terms of showcasing, right? Or how to just walk through life, right? And pivot, and just sometimes you just have to go with it, right? And trust that you'll find those people that are going to believe in you, and then now in return you're believing in others, right? And so I think that it's just a wonderful testament to the resilience that we have, and what focus and that power of discernment also, right? Is you know, something that we all should really practice in being in tune with, and I think that comes from circling back with you, right? I love that you said that you don't have a dimmer, right? That when it's off, it's you're like circling back with yourself, right? And just like being present with yourself and your needs and your wants and desires and creativity or whatever you want to call it. And then,
Mhm.
but it's awesome that when you're on, you're not only just doing your thing, but you're also elevating others. And for that, I mean, I'm just like in awe, of this entire conversation. I want to thank you for taking time today to, share your story and for showing up in your full power, and
My
showing us how it's
superpower.
and with your superpowers, more
My
than one,
superpower.
but showing us how it's done, right?
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of value in that, right? You were saying before that there's really this is like organic and stuff, but no, there's a lot of gravitas, right, to this conversation. And
Yeah.
I think it's just a fantastic conversation, and I really hope not that it's the first of many. Thank you for
Yeah.
joining us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We, Chris, I don't know if you see us, me talk about the Avengers. Like a lot of us in my production network, we consider ourselves the Avengers because we all like kind of multidisciplinary in a lot of cases. But if we're on a set, one of the things with diversity, going back to Secret Society and things that we were doing before Secret Society, is for me as a mentor, showing up and say, hey, even to production companies or younger production companies, like, hey, if you need something, let me know. Just don't tell anyone, right? Because you want to elevate production. But the other part of that is watching that network of folks really grow and us like really nurturing each other, pulling each other in or inviting each other to a set that you're not even on the call sheet for, right? Because being on that set, you're going to meet all these other people, right? So some people, those are the gates that get, kept in some cases, right? So we call ourselves Avengers because in this community, like in the industry, they're like, oh, well, we can't find you, which is a part of Secret Society, right? We don't know where you are and all this other stuff. So we just said, like I've had people come to me and say, hey, Malik, do you ever think about working with your own brands? I'm like, wow, like you really think that less of me, that you don't think that I'm working with my own? Really? You just gave me this brilliant idea or something? So we've been doing this already, and we realize that if we need 20 people on set for something, whether it be a movie or a commercial production or whatever, we can get 20 of us on set, which is what everybody else does, really, basically a bunch of little production companies that are all working together, right? But then you have one guy that's like a DP, that's a director, that's a colorist, that's an editor, right? That's multilingual, all this other stuff, right? So that one guy can potentially be all those different roles on any different set and be totally cool with it, right? So it's like if I needed to do, be a sound mixer on set, or if I'm recording ADR, if I'm actually writing a song or just mixing the project because other people are doing those jobs, we're totally cool because we just know we're all going to hang out. If it's a screening, we'll all be there. If it's a project, we all get to share it, right? And that's the benefit of doing it, right? And we can, and budgets have grown, right? For it's like, okay, we'll just do this to all of a sudden, like everybody feels good about a day rate, right? It's like, okay, this is cool. And we've created that. And I've watched people on LinkedIn say, who are you guys? What's going on? Whatever. We're the same guys who's just been kicking around. We just really, and it's a diverse community, right?
Yeah.
So it's a diverse, we have white directors and we have white this and that or whatever, right? And we have young people coming in and LGBTQ all the way across the board because there's no judgment. Same with the Audio Engineering Society, which, I'm a co-chair of the Engineering Society. Chris, I don't know if we talked about this, but it's 15,000 members in 52 countries, right? And so I'm the first Black chair here in 75 years in Boston. But in my co-chair, Dan Fox, we've gotten to know each other, in a very short amount of time, very quickly by talking about the whys. Why are we doing this together? It was me asking him, hey, let's do co-chair. We can attack this whole New England with my relationships and his relationships. And also me, like, I just knew that one of the things I told him, like, Black is still trending, right? So if you get me, even potentially as a VP, right, you still get this. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. No way. Because, and I was being, kind of coerced to be chair in the first place, but because of Secret Society, I knew it's just a lot. So,
Yeah.
the bandwidth that I would need. So by doing it collectively, not only can we reach more people, we can be very intentional with the rest of our committee. And that's what we've done with that, right?
Yep.
And mostly audio engineering and everything else. We'll get into this in another conversation. There's so many opportunities, so many jobs, everything else, for young people in particular to learn about that aren't spoken. Most people think of audio engineering, they think of in a studio or maybe at a concert, something like that. They're not thinking about acoustic engineering. They're not thinking about
Right.
forensics. They're not thinking about all these different jobs, everywhere. And those are integrated within other industries like audio acoustics. You're working with architects, right?
Yep.
An architectural firm, all these other jobs that happen there. So these career paths could go down different lanes. Same as me is audio mechanical engineering or architectural, getting into music and understanding that, me building my studio a certain way, because I did it, but
Yeah.
those are jobs that a young person could do. So like my involvement in really just kind of like seizing the opportunity to be a chair, right? Also being present in the optics behind me being a chair is a big deal. Me saying, hey, just come for free, just come. We open it up to everyone. Just come and listen and come learn. Don't worry about being a member right now. I need you to actually come in and be aware of these opportunities, right?
Yeah.
As people start working, and then they understand the value, then sure, you can be a member. We do some things that are private, but most things are public by our choice, right? At this point, like we have to really change the dynamic of what's going on here in the community. Yeah. So between AES, Secret Society, Grammy's starting to get involved. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, so that's a big part of like all of this. So again, I appreciate sharing all this because it is a lot. It is a lot, but yeah, it's like if we don't talk about these things out loud, people
Absolutely
aren't going to be aware. Or,
and I just love that you're like owning the space. That to me is like the big aha here, in terms of it doesn't exist or you're finding challenges left and right, then create the damn thing, right? Just do the thing and just create it. And then the right people will show up and come and plug into this and make it grow. And it might be slow and steady, but at least it's going somewhere, right? And it's so funny because sometimes we think we have little resources and it's not until you put it together. So you have a little bit, I have a little bit, you have a little bit, and then all of a sudden becomes at least something. It may not be a lot. And it's so funny because just yesterday I was watching some clips and I saw these 3 young Latino men talking about the avocado toast, right? And so then how it's something that's very Latino. It's like, oh, that's poor people food, right? It's like the avocado drops from the tree and you just take a piece of bread and you slap it, right? And now they're charging you, they're charging you $10 for this, right? And so then it's like we need to own the avocado toast. And so to me, that's the takeaway right now. It's like we have so much in our communities, so much talent, creativity, like toast with avocado. That's right. Now that's become a thing. And so then it's like, but we need to own it. We need to really step in and create our own spaces so we can, direct the narrative and direct people to where they need to be and open doors.
Well, the problem is, I talked to Michael Bobbert about this a bit from the Mass Cultural Council. He's a director of the Mass Cultural Council. And again, I've just been showing up, and a lot of times he's the only other art person in some of these rooms. But my big deal, and I did talk to, the governor about these things, again, I think from a top tier level, people kind of understand what needs to happen in a way, but they can't execute. It's hard. They have a hard time executing. And one of the issues is artists, in our mindset as artists, we are totally excited for somebody to give us a stipend, right? And we feel validated. Let me give you a stipend to go and get on the stage, or, here's some paint, go do the mural, right? And it's all noble work that people are doing, right? Totally brilliant, noble work that they're doing. If without the entrepreneurship, education, right? Without understanding what you're creating. So me as a music person, you hear kids talk about I make beats, right? Those kids making beats don't understand that they're composers, right? So that's the first challenge right there. Or I talk to the person that the voice on top, like, oh, well, you wrote that song? And then like, yeah, like, oh, where'd you get the, you did the music too? Because now I'm fascinated. And they're like, oh no, I downloaded it on YouTube, or I got it off of Instagram, or I leased it, right? So that lack of education there is where, like, so, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity is one thing. Sure, we can get a bunch of different people in the room, right? Inclusion, sure, you can invite them in, but the equity piece is the dirty word to me, because without winning the bid, right, without owning the house, there's no equity. You're never going to build any equity. Doesn't matter. You're just renting, right? So this is what people are generally doing without the entrepreneurship, without understanding, how to structure, and have the infrastructure necessary as an artist, right, to have a podcast, right, to do a podcast studio. Where do you need to be? Well, sure, you can start out of your bedroom. Absolutely, right? But what do you actually, what's the goal there, right? So how do you, and on top of that, like, how do you get that goal, the loan, right? How do you get the money? How do you get the grant? How do you get these things? How do you elevate into a corporation, right? And that's the challenge there. And so even a state challenge is those resources that are coming are going to nonprofits, right? All the big nonprofits, companies that can actually, like qualify with their, however they need to submit a grant, let's say, and then it's a little stipend to the artists, right? Nobody's still talking about entrepreneurship. So, it is starting to happen in the state, where the cultural council is having these conversations and trying to figure out, like, how do we get these resources to that middle tier of someone that has a podcast studio, right? That needs to get funding for that thing. So those are conversations that I'm having, with a lot of folks, because I am that artist. And again, it's just almost a sentiment behind who we are and how we should be treated, right? We should just be the hired help. You come in and do your gig, and that's it. And that's how we get treated a lot of times when we're coming in to do that gig as well, right? You get treated like you're the trio piece band at the wedding in the corner, and go stand over there, and maybe you'll get a vendor meal. You'd be happy as anything. You get to eat what the guests eat, right? And so most musicians in particular, most artists understand that you're put in this box. And so society is not treating us as if we are, a factor of their existence, right? And we are. If we pluck ourselves out, right, they have nothing. And so not until that happens does somebody put value on it, right? And then you have the superficial aspect of who people think they are in Boston. You have, the new additions and new kids, and I look around and I say, where's the legacy at? Where's the little kid that actually benefited from this in the last 40 years, right? Like, who's there? Who's been in the Boys and Girls Club really doing anything? Showing up. But not showing up as a celebrity with shiny stuff on. Like, are you showing up to really create that next level of entrepreneur, right? Because that kid may not have vocal chops. They might not be able to be a musician. Are you elevating them, and are you using your resources to go and get that scholarship that young person might be? Maybe they want to be an accountant. Maybe they want to be in the nursing, in the medical field. Maybe they want to do these things. Who's having these conversations? I know I'm not a celebrity, and I'm not a millionaire. I don't think. I better check. But I'm a regular person. So if I can go talk to the mayor, and I can go talk to the governor and go do these things, if I was a celebrity, Chris, come on, man, make me a celebrity, please. If I was a celebrity, the things that I could do, because I can already get in every room that I pretty much need to get into here that I worked for, right? Getting into these rooms. That's why I feel like I have the energy that I have. There's no way I should be able to do these things as a regular civilian, right? It's a regular, I'm Hollywood. We established that. But think about it, right? All it is intellect. It's articulating ideas, right? So, and I'm able to do it and this is why I'm leveraging positions, the engineering society. That gives me access to go in and have this conversation. So I am working with different brands, whether it be Shure or Focusrite and Native Instruments and all these, on the music side of things, right? So, and that goes across the board. I can go to a clothing manufacturer. I can go, and I've done all these things before, right? And that's a part of my road, my journey, understanding that, they're giving the wrong people the resources, they're giving any celebrity walks in, you're going to get free anything, right? I did this on tour forever. Like, we didn't pay for anything. So, and I realized that that's just how it works. But how do you actually go and sit down with that person that's willing to give on that level and say, hey, it would be so cool if we did this thing. Let's go get 50 of these youngsters, right? Anything going on now with the engineering society, anything with the state. Chris, if you did a party tomorrow, right, and you said, dude, come to my party. If I showed up with like 20 other people that were really interested in what you were doing, you're not going to tell me no.
Right, exactly.
You're going to be happy as anything. You're going to be like, and again, even if it's a corporate environment, and this is the misconception of what happens in these rooms, and I try not to talk as if people are racist or bad or anything like that. They're unaware that it's okay, right? They're unaware, and they don't have that thing that it takes to say, hey, Chris, man, even if I saw you just online, dude, you're doing that podcast thing. Yo, let's talk.
Yep.
You got time? Can we grab coffee or whatever? If you could say no, right? But you're going to check out where I'm coming from, and I'm going to be very respectful as I'm asking you, and you're never going to say no. Generally, you might not have time this week, right? So you reserve that, but you might say, something, March is going to slow down at the end of March.
Right.
Let's get that on the calendar, right? A lot of people don't know that it's okay to do that, right? And the people that have the power don't extend themselves to say, hey, I see you're doing that thing. I'm hooked up with Native Instruments, or I'm hooked up with this other thing. You should actually come in and check out this demo that we're doing, which is what we do at AES, right? We find different manufacturers and we open it up from a manufacturing standpoint, or just, educational, immersive audio, all these different things that you hear, right? Like, hey, let's just show up at this company and let's let a bunch of people come in and see how that's done.
Yeah.
Let's listen to this conversation, and that's what sometimes you have to feel that, and you got to be in that room. Like, I've been in rooms with guys that are 97 years old that invented reverb units and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, yo, what am I doing? But then I look around, I'm like, I'm the only black guy in this room. I know that guy would be happy as anything if there was 20 more, 50 more of me in here. So that's the thing there that bothers me so much, to say, hey, something, let me create awareness. Even if we don't have enough food, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, just come in the room, because I know I can do that, and it's not like a Pied Piper thing or nothing. I want everyone to just have access to come in, because the more opportunities that are created for them are the more opportunities that inadvertently will be created for me. And it builds my brand, inadvertently builds my brand as well. Everybody remembers who hooked them up with something, whatever that thing is. Unless you're a jerk. And if you're a jerk, then you're not.
You're out of the
So there's one or the other. But any person of integrity is going to be like, oh, wow. So I try to do that in passing, because I meet cool people sometimes that have nothing to do with me, but could benefit somebody else. And I'm like, yo, let me slide this across the table. I think you guys should meet each other. And I go on about my way. My thing is, like, when you guys have a party, just call me.
Or reach out.
Some food.
Can I tell you something? It's so funny you say that, because, and yes, you're absolutely right. Sometimes just white people just don't know what to do, right? When you walk into these spaces. In the case of Chris, that's how we met, actually, because I was part of a board in the arts, actually, talking about the arts. And in my first meeting, I listened, observed, and then started dropping bombs, right? I was like, nicely, very articulate, and I didn't use any foul language or anything, but I was making solid observations, right? I'm like, and making rhetorical questions, because I know they're not going to be solved, right? The kind of questions that I ask, right? And so in leaving the parking lot of that first meeting, lo and behold, I get a call from Mr. Chris Majocha, right? And he's like, hey, you just left the meeting. I'm Chris Majocha. And I'm like, yeah, you're the marketing manager, right, of this board. And he's like, yeah, can we have coffee? This was what, 6-7 years ago? And I'm looking, y yo, pero ven acá. Dios mío. Right? What does this white millennial male, right?
Want
to talk with a chick like me?
Sounds like the same Chris I met.
I'm like, ¿qué pasó? I'm like, sure. And then that was it. We met for coffee, and we fell in love with each other, right? Like it was like, dude, yes, let's do this, right? Whatever
Yep.
it is. And that's when it's not even friendship, like we're family, right?
Yep.
Like throughout the years, it's just, that's it. You're part of, we're family from a human to human level. Like we
Yeah.
saw each other, right? And so I think that there's space too for people to feel, I feel a little bit more confident themselves, right? And reaching out. And so, yeah, by you showing up the way you do, I'm sure you create this environment where it's like, oh, wait a second, you know, they're approachable.
Yeah, well,
Approachable, right?
it's not that difficult. It's
Yeah.
really not that difficult. I'm a common denominator, as people will say. They'll call me a
Yes.
common denominator.
Yeah.
And I've done this forever, because whether it be hanging out in a club,
Yeah.
you talk
Yeah.
to everyone, that kind of thing. But mostly from a professional standpoint, if I know that it's very difficult, but I know there's some cool people that you should meet, right? When you're in that room together, I'm just going to make sure. And the dynamic of what happens is, if the three of us were in a space talking, and if one of my friends showed up, very easily just to make an introduction, and then I might leave, right? And sometimes in some cases, it could be like 5 or 6 people that are all kind of, huddling together because we're having cheese and crackers at some little cocktail hour, right? And so when one of my friends, and I say this all the time, because some of my friends are like, oh no, they don't care about me, or they don't invite me, or this and that. I'm like, dude, like, just stop it. Like, I'll be there. Look for me if I'm talking to someone. And it's so telltale. To me, it's kind of like a game, right? I know that I'm not going to sit there and talk to you guys if you are not of integrity, period. Right? So I've already assessed that whole situation. I've already vetted the situation per se, right? And so when my other friend that I respect comes into the circle, right, I can say confidently, meet my friends, right? That's it. We could be around a campfire. We could be in a corporate environment with suits on. We could just be hanging out on the block. It's all the same dynamic, right? Our environment, being in those corporate environments is what we're not used to. We as people in the community, right? Even the Latino community, right? There's a lot of like segregation and siloed pockets of folks.
Oh my God. Yes.
And even looking between Black and in the Latino community, some people are like, oh, Black people don't like Latino. I'm like, what are you, silly? Like, I grew up in Dorchester. Like, to this day, like all my Puerto Rican and my Dominican neighbors, right, from El Salvador and different people that I know, they're all just my people, right? There might be cultural differences, and I'm a little bit flamboyant sometimes, like when we're hanging out. But in my neighborhood, I live in a cul-de-sac, and my Puerto Rican neighbors of my family that actually, they moved, so I'm sad. But they used to do like a quinceañera or something, right? And there's like 50 cars on the street. And so all the white neighbors would actually, like, because they're cool with me, I'm the safe Black guy, right? So like they would come and say, why do they have to have so many people there? And I'm like, you really should probably go over and just hang out. So I would go to my friends, my boy Petey. I'm like, yo, I'm going to invite them over to your house, right? And he's going to say, Papa, no problem, man. Come on, right? Yeah. And so I realized that me being like, it's sad because why they're right next door to you. There's no fence. You can see. And they're super, super cool. And so me and that family in the wintertime, we had snow blowers, right? So we'd go around and blow whatever houses are close to us, which is those same people complaining. And that family still takes care of them. Yeah. Right? And so that's the sentiment there, where it's almost like you got to shake your head like, oh my God, dealing with these people. And I think to this day, well, I should say since that relationship, they never did. Or my neighbor right next to me that has a swimming pool with my daughter, she was like, 12, 13 years old. They'd come over and say, oh, when your daughter's here, she can just come and swim in the pool. I'm like, oh, thank you, lady. That's nice. But then when she's playing with her little Puerto Rican friend, right, or the little Latina girl, she's not allowed in the swimming pool. Isn't that interesting? So you mean my daughter can't play when she's with her friend that is a neighbor of at least 10 years at that time,
Yeah.
and they see them playing outside and playing basketball and all the stuff that kids do, but they're not allowed to go swim. The two little girls, why can't they bring their Barbie dolls and just go and hang out in the pool? That level of racism is just this.
Yeah.
It's so it makes me say, like, I can't even be cool with you no more. How about that? How about, like, now I know it's not worth my argument at all.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to be accessible to you because you think it's okay to have a safe black friend. But that's the way it happens. That's just the way it
everywhere.
Happens.
Yes, everywhere.
Yeah, and that's what I deal with. But I try to advocate, whether it be language, that particular family, some language barriers. So me, being able to articulate a little bit, and translate a little bit when the police show up for whatever it is, because that happens too sometimes, right? So I go over to the cops and say, hey, man, what's going on, right? Because I'm just chill. Like, I'm the dude that has cop friends, and guess what? I get it, right? The cops, I can do this because I know the cops don't want anything negative. They don't want to have to respond to that call, right? At the end of the day, these are like two guys with blue suits on that actually happen to have to show up. They're not coming there. As if they were, that would be elevated differently. But I know I can go to them and say, hey, man, let me help you out here. This gentleman here is the only one home, might not be able to, he doesn't speak great English or whatever. Let me try to figure it out. And so letting them know lets them know that this person isn't responding because they don't understand.
Right.
Exactly. How often does that happen? Right. People don't respond. They're like, no. And then the cops go off the handle. So I've been that guy in my community, but I've always been that guy in communities, because if I have access to the powers that be, I can actually go and say, hey, something, they're cool. Let me handle this. Call me, take my number. Next time something happens, just give me a shout. I live right across the street. If you see my door open, just come and whatever. Like, I literally live across the street. And that's happened, in many occasions where I've had to do that. Inspectors, my neighbors put an addition on their house. But they used a tree, like in PR, like straight up.
Yeah.
They literally used a tree as a post, and the inspector showed up, right? Because the neighbors called on them. But it was so dope, and it was such a lesson that I learned, to be like, it's wood, right? Now it's a thickness of wood. Again, I'm from the architectural field, right? So I kind of get it when it comes to building. And I'm like, something that was brilliant. So watching that inspector actually in awe to say, whoa, after the other neighbor called the inspector on them, right? That nonsense. So again, it's creating that balance. Hopefully they made friends that day, right? Because now the inspector's like, wow, they just did something really unique. It's legal, it's wood. And all he did that day was basically say, reinforce these beams up top.
Yeah. How great.
They didn't have a permit. They didn't have anything. Right? But it was so fascinating. So again, like, witnessing that stuff, and that's kind of like, that goes to the community thing, right?
Right.
So how do we support each other as community at the end of the day? So my lines get blurred between the creative part and the social community part. And I feel like this, the more we can do that, the more we create, the awareness and understanding of cultures, right? And so, that's like male, female, LGBTQ, all the stuff in between. This is who you are. Let me respect you for who you are, but let me just learn who you are first. Let me take a second to listen to you and figure out who you say you are. Tell me whoever you are, I'm good.
I'll just say real quick, and this is, I think, a testament to both of you, and I think we sort of met in similar ways, but it's also how you two do show up into spaces as your genuine, authentic self, to be vulnerable and to have those uncomfortable conversations. And I mean, Sami, like when I met you in the boardroom, and you were dropping those bombs, and we were trying to diversify the arts and cultural community in Central Florida at the time. And, a part of it was diversifying the board members and staff and stuff. But Malik, even to your point, there are certain people who are gatekeepers, or who may, be of a certain color or a certain ethnicity or demographic, but have zero connection or ties or understanding of what's actually happening in the community on the streets. And when somebody who's authentic comes in and is navigating that, like, hey, I'm coming into a boardroom, but I'm going to tell you the work I'm doing on the street and in the community. It is, I'm not going to say like more approachable, but more of a like, I guess in itself, who I am too. Like I want to see positive change. And when I see other people who are like, hey, you're not just talking about it, you're actually doing it. Like, how can I, something to your point, how can I plug into that? Because you guys show up into space and you influence that space. You're aware of your surroundings, aware of who's there, what needs to happen for that situation to go smoothly, but you're not just a bystander, like a random electron floating around or whatever. You're actually like, hey, I'm going to create some energy here and create a different outcome from how this was before I walked into this room. So just a testament to how both of you are, and Malik, you've definitely shared that here today. We do need to wrap up just time wise, but I would love to have you back on. And just again, you said share, bring people to the party and stuff. If you have people that you think would be great on the show as well, would love to just give more people a platform and a voice. And I have something to say, so just want to keep this up. And it was great meeting you. I'm glad I got to learn more about your story. I know we just met a few weeks ago and was like, I don't know what, like, I just need to have you on the podcast because I'll learn about you through that. But yeah, now let's definitely grab a coffee or whatever and see how we can work together. As you mentioned, I'm a producer, you're in a different space and stuff, and we can always try to make things happen. So this was awesome. Thank you again for being a guest on our show. And until next time, just again, keep doing what you're doing out there.
Yes,
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate sharing and hearing your stories as well. So I look forward to the next time.
Awesome. Thank you. See you.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. Thank you for tuning in, and tell your friends to find us on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to show up and speak up.